Hazbin Hotel Season 2 is a bit underwhelming in my opinion. Granted, it's not god awful, but it isn't great by any means necessary. Unfortunately, I may have set my expectations a little way too high for this season. Knowing Viv, I probably should have expected the quality of the first season, but hey, what can you do, right? I still love the show all the same. If you like the Helliverse and animation review content, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We're almost at 7,000 subscribers and it would make my day if you got me there. Okay, so what is Hazbin Hotel Season 2's main problem, you may be asking? That is the root cause of all these other problems, and by far the most impactful issue. That's easy. It's simply the fact that Season 2 I feel is too bloated with all these plot threads. The season is simply setting up way too much. When a story sets up too many plot threads, it makes it harder for the writers and viewers to keep track of them all. Let me just tell you about each of the major plot threads of Hazbin Hotel Season 2, and why it kind of feels a little cluttered in my opinion. We have Lilith's involvement and backstory, Lute's revenge, Vaggy's name change, Fox's plan to take over Heaven, Alistair's plan, and last but not least we have Charlie's redemption using the hotel, the main storyline. The show's main premise, which feels very neglected, especially this season. When you set up too much for a single season, it makes the plot threads feel insignificant since they either aren't followed up on, or they take a while to be touched upon again. Which is fine to let it cook, as some would put it, but it feels like the season is trying to balance all these threads like it's a pinball machine bouncing between all of them. I'm going to go over each plot thread and explain how it's being developed and where it could go and what effects the sheer number of threads is having on each of them. Firstly, Lute's revenge arc is probably one of the most interesting threads in my opinion. Lute in this season is now dealing with her immense grief from the death of her partner in arms Adam, who was killed at the end of season 1. Not only is she dealing with grief, but she's also in the pursuit of revenge against Hell, specifically Charlie and the hotel as a whole. The main conflict of her revenge plan is that strictly goes against the orders from her superiors, like the Seraphim, as she reluctantly accepts to back down, at least for now, but vows to carry out her revenge in secrecy to avoid the consequences from the Seraphim, which could include, and may not be limited to, being cast out of heaven. Lute has a lot to lose here, not to mention she's straight up going insane since she's hallucinating Adam's existence so vividly that it's almost as if he's in the actual room with her, like she can actually hear him. Which is pretty scary, and it just shows the sheer decline of her mental health. She could have some crazy Scarlet Witch arc going on here with her grief. However, this thread hasn't really kicked off yet since episode 2, at all. I'm not rushing Viv or the team, I'm just saying that there's too many threads being thrown here at once that some are dominating the others. For example, we don't even see Lute until episode 5, and get this, when Lute enters Hell alongside Sarah and Emily for the first time since the exterminations, including the death of Adam, and Lute legit does nothing and doesn't even acknowledge Charlie at all. The person she sang about killing last time? I know the argument could be made that she's obeying the Seraphim, but she doesn't even speak to Charlie or really anything. She's just perched up there like a bird obeying everything and just sitting there. It's like her revenge scheme is put on hold to focus on Vox and his rise in power and plan to conquer Heaven. So essentially what you get here is that the plot thread just putting itself on hold so the other two threads don't collide, and that's a problem that persists throughout this season. However, Lute crashing out at Vox was actually pretty funny here. Now Vaggy's name change isn't really important to the main narrative, since whether her name changes or not, it doesn't really do much harm or influence the story at all. So it's more so a dumb, cringy little subplot more than anything else. The show hasn't really given us a concrete reason why Vaggy wants to change her name, but it's most likely because it was a name given to her by Adam. It was intended to be insulting, since she's legit named after a vagina. However, the name change thing was only really discussed in the first episode, as since then this plot point has not really been brought up again. The only thing we've seen closest to it recently was that of episode 5 when Lucifer calls Vaggy the wrong name, but it's unclear if that's just him being forgetful of her name as he usually is, since he tends to be very forgetful, or he's just calling her that because this is one of her previous new names she picked out. Who knows? Irregardless, this whole subplot for Vaggy is kinda disappeared. What also makes this thread kinda dumb in the first place is that the fact that they're marketing season 2, they're still referring to her as Vaggy. As well, the community and audience will probably still call her Vaggy even if they do change the name. Alistair's plan is another thread within this new season, that being in episode 4 after fighting against the V's, Alistair strangely decides to give up against Vox, makes a deal to become his prisoner, only if he agrees to not touch Charlie as well as sparing both Nifty and Husk. However, not much has really come of this plan since, and Alistair so far is only there just to run his mouth like he has a poetry book up his ass, and have more, sexual tension with Vox as usual. However, this thread seems to be building in the background, since I'll probably make a dedicated video about this next time, but it seems Alistair is actually trying to ignite a civil war amongst the V's. Think about it, in episode 5 and 6, Alistair uses Vox's narcissism against him, since whenever Vox asks his fellow V's for help with his plan, Alistair actually interjects and stabs a dagger into Vox's narcissistic wound by telling him that he has to beg for help from Velvet and Valentino for his plan to actually work, causing Vox to show dominance over them, to show off to Alistair and show a desperate play for control for Alistair's attention and approval. But this is exactly what Alistair wants, as it's causing the V's to resent Vox, which will cause his plan to eventually fail, since if his own team members turn against him, he will surely lose. Think back to what Baron Zemo said in the MCU, an empire toppled by its enemies can always rise again, but one which crumbles from within, that's dead forever. I'll have a larger video about this plan that I think he's going for in this season, since if this is his plan, it's actually kind of genius. And then we have Vox's plan to take over Heaven, seemingly the main thread of this particular season, that being that Vox and the V's want to take over Heaven and Hell. The real reason for this is actually very generic, because Vox just wanting to take over just for the sake of it seemingly. However, Vox is a narcissist and wants total control, since deep down he's afraid of what Alistair and others really think of him, and is extremely insecure, so him having control over both Heaven and Hell thinks that'll really heal his deep insecure hole inside him. It probably won't. But so on a psychological level, it's actually pretty interesting, but on the surface, his motivations are kind of lame and generic. Unfortunately, this thread takes a while to get moving this season, as episodes 1 through 4, really nothing comes of it at all. It's only until episodes 5 and 6 this week is when it actually starts moving along, but we learned that it has secretly been building in the background, as it was revealed recently that Angel Dust was actually being mind controlled by Vox, and has been spying over the hotel this whole time as part of his master plan to take over. Since he definitely knows redemption is possible, since he overheard Emily telling Charlie this information because he was spying. However, that will only impede on his plans, which makes sense why he wants to, shut the whole thing down. Him using Angel Dust to spy is actually exactly how he knew Lucifer couldn't smite him down. Again, that cop-out is still extremely stupid and was only there to make tensions and stakes still be present, since we all know that Lucifer would Incredible Hulk Vox's ass otherwise. Plot thread kicking off with episode 6 means we only really have 2 episodes left for his plan to actually start working and, getting into full gear, and for it to only conclude in that same allotted time. I would have much preferred if this plan started kicking in around the early episodes of this season, like maybe episode 3 or 4, so we would have plenty of more time to witness Vox's destruction, so the ending of the season's victory would pay off much more. Or maybe just have the season have more episodes. I wouldn't be that opposed to having 10 episodes. Why do we actually only have to have 8? Feels a little odd to me. I mean, last season was only 8, but I really feel they should have 10, just extend that runtime like they did with the episode's duration. Lastly, we have Charlie's hotel and redeeming her friends and fellow sinners, which as we all know is the show's main thread, and is what everything revolves around at the end of the day. But this season I've actually kind of forgotten about the whole Hazbin Hotel's purpose, since it's been pretty overshadowed by some of these other threads. Even Baxter, the new sinner who was set up to be this next sinner redeemed by the hotel, just completely faded into the background. Baxter doesn't even show up much in this season. Heck, I don't think we've even seen him leave the hotel since episode 1. He's seemingly forgotten about and doesn't feel like a new character at all since we barely see him. Do much to further the plot, and it's just kind of absorbed into the background. Not to mention, this season Charlie has been in the hotel's greatest enemy, since she's been making dumb decision after dumb decision like she's getting paid to do it, and feeding into Vox's bullshit, only making the slander worse, and making Vox continue, even becoming extremely petty because Vaggie didn't tell her that she was going to ask her dad for help. However, thankfully, Charlie does start to realize her error of her ways and how much of a petty, selfish asshole she's been being this season. Hopefully that doesn't get reversed. I hope not. I just really hope the focus returns to the hotel itself later on and the process of redeeming sinners again, since as of right now, the season has to balance all these plot threads that it either bounces around between them or straight up neglects others to, support the other ones they want to focus on. There's just too much going on, I feel. Subscribe if you're excited for Season 2's finale this week. Oh, also join that Discord down below. And this has been your host, Axel, signing off. Thank you, and good night.